We're here today with Oak Capital Advisors Tom Arndt and Shipman Northcutt of Northway Commercial, and we're talking about why do you need a business broker? Whether you're a buyer of a small business, we're talking small business too today, right, fellas?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
And you know, not just a big conglomerate Fortune 500 company, but why would someone need it as a buyer or a seller? Why does there need to be a middle person brokering the conversation when buying or selling a business? What's the importance? What's the value? Talk to me.
Well, John, you just mentioned a very key point, which is it's not just from a seller perspective or a buyer perspective. Both parties really have the need of a business broker.
Yep, for sure. It's it's one of maybe two transactions in your lifetime. It's a significant transaction. It's a significant investment, or it's going to be very important. And when we think about the transaction itself, you think about other major transactions in your life, John. So, for instance, would you buy or sell a home if you didn't have any experience in it without the expertise of a real estate broker or any other major ventures in life? You know, if you decided to take a safari trip to Africa, would you do it without a travel agent that had the experience and the knowledge? So those are some examples of why. But typically, a business transaction is much more complex than any real estate transaction that I've been involved in, because it requires a lot of detail and there's a lot of moving pieces to the typical business transaction for both the buyer and the seller.
Yeah, there's a lot of steps in the process, and discovery is so important. The business broker can get very deeply involved in the discovery process and help the potential buyer and the potential seller to understand the business, understand the process, understand the transaction, and what's all involved. Shipman made a key point. It's either the seller selling a business that he spent years developing, or it's the buyer using his funds that he's probably spent a lifetime putting together to buy the business. So both parties have a big stake in this transaction.
In business brokers like Tom and myself, John, we've done a lot of them. We not only have we owned our own businesses, we've worked for corporations that we've brokered businesses for, and so with the experience, you know, it's more of a natural process for most business brokers. They understand where the key elements are hidden in various documents that need to be uncovered, and we bring up those speed bumps in the road so that we can vet them out for a win-win for both buyer and seller in the transaction.
Gotcha.
And another key point, John, which is the seller, while he's trying to complete the transaction, needs to keep a focus on running his business. He's got a business to either grow or maintain. Obviously, if he wants to maintain the value, and if he takes his eyes off that ball while he's trying to sell, the business could deteriorate.
So let's say you're and I know that you've worked with CPAs and attorneys and so on, even helping someone who's got a service business, let's say a female lawyer or a female CPA or a joint venture of a husband and wife or a couple or a significant other owning a business together. Just that alone could put some complications in there. So understanding the changes in the economy, the SBA, what's latest at the banks if someone wants to partially finance part of the business. There's a lot of issues, even if you're an experienced business owner, about the business transaction that the broker can start answering and problem solving really potentially for both sides.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, John. Really, there's a preliminary process both for the seller that we go through and also for the buyer, and they're two different discussions, ultimately working for a common goal of an acquisition or merger of the business. But the other piece I think you mentioned, John, that I'd like to tag on to is that many times during the process of buying a business or selling a business, there is expertise required, whether it be an attorney, whether it be a CPA, whether it be a commercial real estate broker or something along those lines, that we have sources for that goes beyond our expertise, but we have the resources available to us to resolve those issues.
So you're like an orchestra director a little bit, bringing together the buyer and the seller. Does a business broker represent one or the other? Because I know a business broker is involved as an intermediary to solve these kinds of problems that can come up so that the transaction can occur and there can be really a win-win. That's what truly a good business broker should be looking for, shouldn't they?
Absolutely, because we consider our clients lifetime clients, right? It's not a transaction and done. And quite honestly, our end goal is to create the win-win, like you talked about, so that the seller can go and do what they choose to do with life and is very happy with the legacy they left behind. That's very important. We have found, and also the buyer coming in, they can build a net worth or whatever they choose to do with the business for the future to provide for their families, if that's what they're trying to do with it. So it's and those become our clients, lifetime clients, because if we do a good job and create the win-win, then we've done our job.
Well, I'd like to emphasize too that not only do we owe fairness to both parties, but we really value highly our integrity and confidentiality. We know how important this transaction is to both parties, and keeping it confidential, particularly to the seller, critically important. So we work, we watch what we're doing to make sure that we are maintaining our integrity and the confidentiality of the transaction throughout, for the benefit of both parties.
Yeah. It's and I think you touched on something a while ago. We typically represent one or the other, John. But in co-brokerage is pretty rare. It's probably pretty difficult to do, to be honest with you, because to John's point, there is a lot of very personal and confidential information that shouldn't be shared or could be shared at the right time. So, but I think about our process when we go through this, and Tom and I were talking about it earlier. If we could just touch on a few of those things real quick, John.
Yeah, let's finish up with that, some of the summary, and then of course let us know about your contact information for both North Wake and Oak Capital, and excited about sharing that. But tell us what else is on the list, Shipman.
So we just kind of want to again skim the top, give a 30,000-foot view of the typical process. Is that whether we're representing the buyer or the seller, we're on their behalf, we're venting the other party, right? So part of it, if we're representing a buyer, we're looking for a seller, and we have the networks to do that. And if we're representing the seller, then we have the networks and the ability to find the type of business they're searching for. So that's a big piece of it. And so once we find that party or on either side of the transaction that we're representing, we go into great detail in understanding the financial impact. It's not here's the guy, meet Tom, this is Shipman, y'all work it out. We go into great detail in uncovering the financials. With Tom's expertise, we do a full profit and loss analysis and a cash flow analysis. And then that really kind of leads to, and I'll turn it over to Tom, about a restatement of the financials for the buyer.
We take a lot of effort to understand what we call seller's discretionary earnings, which is not necessarily profit. That's certainly a factor. It's the cash flow of the business that's available to a potential buyer to run the business post-sale. So the buyer's going to want to know, can I pay myself a salary? What about interest payments? What about growth, capital expenditures? How much money is available to the buyer to run the business after the transaction is completed. And there's a lot of expenses in a profit and loss statement that are non-cash. Depreciation, for example, interest, amortization. And then, of course, the buyer, oftentimes the seller, sometimes, let's say, runs a few expenses through the business that may be more personal in nature than business related. Not unusual in a small business. Obviously, you don't want to work with somebody who has overdone it, but it happens almost all the time. And so we need to look at those kinds of expenses as well, that kind of cash flow. So it's a pretty detailed process, and it takes a while to do it.
So a broker can help distill what's available to a potential new owner when they're buying the business, because it might not just be, here are the sales, here's the profit. They may be using some of the expenses, and if you distill that out, there may be more value in the business if you're selling it with a business broker to help determine that. And for a buyer, they're clear about what the income they would have when they would sell it. So that's a critical point, I think, that you've made.
Absolutely, and I hope that comes across clear, because that's what we do. I mean, we would do any other kind of transaction. We want to have a full understanding of the performance of the business for both the buyer and the seller before we even, quite honestly, go market it. So it's there's a lot of due diligence, a lot of work that needs to be done in order to serve both parties.
Yeah, we're going to look in detail at the last 3 years. Typically, assuming the business has been in operation for that period, we want to see the history for at least the last 3 years and analyze what the cash flow generation has been over the last 3 years. Right now, it's kind of a unique time, thanks to the current health situation. Some businesses are suffering this year. So perhaps in 2021, we may discount 2020 performance, for example, but we want to look at the history of the business over the last 3 years, if possible.
So any questions that people might have who are quietly, confidentially thinking about selling their business, or it's you could be an executive of any gender or background, really any age, and looking to buy a business too. But knowing what you're buying, knowing what you're selling, making sure you have the trust of a business broker is critical. Any other contact information or last thoughts as we finish up?
Yeah, so I'll give my contact information. I can be reached at area code 919-271-7504. I'm a broker at Northcutt Commercial Realty, and also a teammate of Tom's at Oak Capital. And my phone number is 919-452-2788. Email address is tom@oakcapitaladvisors.net. And you can find out more about us too on the internet at www.oakcapitaladvisors.net. And we will look forward to working with you.
Very good. Thank you. Why a business broker? Great information. Shipman, Tom, talk to you next time.
Thank you, Don.